Hey Wayne,
James,
how
how
are
are
you?
you?
Good, good. Yeah, all things considered. How about you?
I'm doing okay. Yep. Yep. We finally got our first snowstorm of the season here. So
Yeah,
I've uh, spent a little time in the last couple of days digging out and making sure my feathered friends are well stocked for the next few days. I think we have another storm coming in. So, yeah.
I don't know. Oh, so you keep chickens?
No, I mean the birds.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, I got a couple of feeders outside my window so that, when I want to just take a little break, I can stare out the window at the birds.
Heck yes. No, my Liz and I, when we first moved into our house, the folks that had lived here before us were pretty prolific birders, and the one thing they said, they're like, do whatever the hell you want with the house, do anything you want. All we ask is that you keep feeding the birds. And that's what we did. That is what we did. So
Well, I'll tell you, I've never been in a place that has such an interesting diversity of birds as here on the banks of the Connecticut River. I see bald
mm,
eagles and
oh, I
peregrine
bet.
falcons and all kinds of interesting birds.
Yeah, I'm right. I'm about 400 feet from the Long Island Sound.
Uh,
Uh, so we get all kinds of stuff.
yeah.
All kinds of stuff. If anything, I'm one of my dogs is relatively small. I worry a little bit about him sometimes when he's out in the backyard because there's some pretty big pretty big falcons and stuff rolling around.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay,
so
so
what are you thinking? Yeah,
I'm thinking, I want to kind of do a bit of a summation of your years at Mowgli and then talk about what your new job.
sure,
Um,
sure.
so let me just start with by saying that I'm speaking with everybody's friend James Hart, and uh, James has been a stalwart Mowgli for quite a number of years now. So we're gonna spend some time talking about, um, I guess, sort of saying goodbye uh, to the extent that he is no longer going to be full time at Mowgli, but also learning a little more about what he's going to be doing in his new life. So, James, if you don't mind, why don't you kind of give us a sort of a précis of the James Hart years at Mowgli?
Sure. So you can't hold me to all the dates and um, so I believe my first summer at Mowgli was 92. My dad was working at basically he's one of the maintenance guys at camp, and he was kind of dropping me off with the Cubs a little bit, sort of on a daily basis. And 93 was my first actual year. Did 3 years as a Cub all the way through. Graduated in 2000, right? The summer before Mowgli closed for the 2001 summer.
Right.
But it was interesting, and I think I know in the course of your interviews you've covered all manner of some of the ins and outs at Mowgli and even some of the complicated ones, right? And one of the sort of interesting parts of my time at camp is my first couple of years were with Bob as the director, and then there was a few years where my dad sort of got this battlefield promotion, if you will, to director alongside Peter Dietz,
Hmm.
um, and that was for one of the bigger chunks of my time at camp, and then my last couple of years were under Tim Platt. So Mowgli looked, it changed and evolved a good bit in the time that I was there. It got a little fuller, and then sort of, and then there was that weird break, and a big part of why I didn't really end up coming back to Mowgli till many years later was that my first year that I would have been on junior staff didn't exist,
Right.
and
Right.
You know, and certainly some of the some of the, you know, the details of my dad's departure, you know, made it kind of complicated for me. You
Hmm.
know, this place that had felt like a second home. You know, I'm not sure if you, well, I know you obviously had met my mom, but you know, my mom passed away the fall between my Panther and my Denier.
Oh, I didn't know that, James.
And I remember like telling my dad that I didn't want to go back, you know, and he laid it out to me very clearly. And he was like, what do you think she would want? You know, and I remember when he said something along the lines of, uh, he said she hated sending you to camp, not because she didn't think you were enjoying yourself, but because it was so hard for her to give you up for that time, you know, and to know that you were going to write these crappy 2 sentence letters to her when all she would have wanted were, you know, multi-page diatribes, right? But she did it because she knew, with everything that was going on in our lives at that time, that Mowgli was unequivocally the best place for me to be. And this is something that I have hammered home with the boys, you know, once I was, you know, in leadership at Mowgli, was that Mowgli is a place where you first get to try out being something that vaguely resembles an authentic version of yourself. And Mowgli was that place for me. I was picked on mercilessly at school. And at Mowgli, I had value, right? Things that I was good at mattered. The fact that I
Yeah.
knew how to start a fire, the fact that I knew how to find dry kindling even on a rainy day, right? Those talents became valuable. And so it was on, if I can be honest, Wayne, that gap after when I graduated was kind of heartbreaking. You know,
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
it almost, and this isn't like, I don't think this is true in a factual sense, but in my heart, it kind of is that it almost felt like it got taken, right? That like next logical step kind of got taken.
Hmm.
And the whole reason that I ended up back at Mowgli, uh, Tommy Greenbow, Tommy Greenbow, so Tommy and I, he graduated in 98. But we were Cubs together for 1 year. My first year of Cubs is his last year of Cubs. And we remained friends all throughout our, you know, our time together at camp. And over the years, he would, you know, at least once or twice a year, I would hear from Tommy Greenwell, and he'd be like, "When are you coming back?" Right? And even when I was in the army, you know, is this the summer? And I'm like, yeah, they don't give us summers off, you know. And then I remember when I got out of the army and I moved back to New Haven, and I was starting grad school, and he was like, "Well, I know you got your summers off, and we need a rifle instructor. What are you doing?" You know, and then I remember he came down to New Haven to kind of, I wouldn't say twist my arm, but maybe twist my arm a little bit. And I had just met my wife, Liz, who you've, you know, obviously
Yep.
met and ended up finding her own place at Mowgli. And I was like, yeah, but I just met this beautiful woman. I can't just disappear for the summer, you know? And he goes, well, you need to come, mom. And this is summer of, I believe, 2014, I think. Um, we went back up. And Wayne, when I tell you, it was like not a day had passed. I, I, I remember the first day. It was the first Sunday of camp. So the kids had arrived on Saturday, first Sunday. We'd gone through a week or so of staff training, all that stuff. And I wasn't a manager or anything. I was just a dorm counselor. I was the lead dorm counselor in Panther. I was just a regular Joe. And I remember we were lining the boys up in chapel order, and no one was like putting them in chapel order. No one was like doing the thing. Everyone was kind of like looking for someone to kind of, and I was like, okay. And then I just remember a bunch of the counselors like giving me this look like, who is this guy? Because now I'm, you know, putting kids in order and I'm telling the counselors they need to stop talking and get in the back of the line and all this stuff. And it just, Wayne, when I tell you, it just felt so natural and so right. It it's so hard. And you are one of the few people I think that when I say that to, who I think really like gets it.
Oh yeah.
And it's yeah.
You know,
Um
I it's it I it's so cool to hear you talk about this early part, because when we talked the last time, we didn't really get to that part. I mean, everything I identify with so much of what you're saying. For Alice, it was incredibly hard to send Zach off to Mowgli. I mean, it broke her heart.
Yep.
But then after the first year, you couldn't keep her away from the place.
Yep.
And just last night, we're going to go back even more in the Hart lineage here, but just last night, I spent about an hour and a half talking with somebody about your grandfather and about the effect of watching him step onto the rock, the council rock, and read the first chapter of the Jungle Book, and how he could, how the way he had a voice for Tabaqui, and he had a voice for Shere Khan, and he would just no matter how many years I would go back and listen to it, I would be mesmerized.
Yeah.
And so it gets in your soul. So
Oh,
even when
yeah.
the place struggles, there's something so important. Even what you just said about lighting a fire in the rain. I mean, there's
Yeah.
very few things in a Mowgli boy's life that are as important to their self-confidence as building a fire in the rain.
Mhm. No, I couldn't agree more. And
Yeah.
it's funny you mentioned my grandfather reading. Like one of my fondest memories, I was so fortunate that when we moved to New Hampshire when I was about, kindergarten aged, that I spent a lot of time with him, in his later years. They were just over in Plymouth, and I had these very vivid memories of sitting with him in his living room, and he would read to me. That was like the thing when I would go over and spend the day. That was often a big chunk of what we do. He'd find these different books at the library,
Mm,
and that's something I brought with me definitely back to camp,
yeah.
and I always would. I just remember that first summer back. I love good ghost stories. I love like I don't want to say like really freaking the kids out, but like basically freaking them out. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like I have such a fond memory of that as a camper that like, and I just want to say out loud for anyone that listens to this, like I had so much more fun as a counselor than as a camper because it's so great to participate in all those things and to go swimming and to archery and to hike and all that. But like when you are in the position of being able to help make that happen for these kids, right? And just, scare the ever loving bejesus out of them with a ghost story. Or like all the little things that they think they're getting away with that that they're doing. Like I remember having this conversation with Nick that first summer because I had this one camper, Ben Morgan Butcher was his name, who was just like a prolific reader. And taps would blow, and then it would be, knocking on 10:30 inspection. And I see him under his blanket with the little sort of faint light of his flashlight reading books. And it'd be 11 o'clock at night, and I'd still see it going on. I'm sitting there going, do I even have it in me to like tell this young man to stop reading? Like,
Right.
no, no, absolutely not. Are you kidding me? It's 2014. I'm thankful it's not an iPad, like, but so this is like 2014. It was sort of weird. The next couple of years, I sort of organically kind of melded into an HQ role, and that happened right around the same time that Nick and the board decided to look for a development person.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll say sort of the quiet part out loud, which is that you know, um, something I was not aware of at the time, but now, I'm aware of, which is that, a whole bunch of people had applied for that role. And a lot of them, ranging, there were some alumni, but a lot of them were like fundraising professionals. And Nick had shared with me, later that it just didn't feel quite right, because he was looking at these people that had, raised lots of money for this thing or that thing. But he was just uncertain. And maybe part of it was because he was still very much learning Mowgli then, that, um, he said to me, he reached out to a friend of his who had recently been in the same position, and the call that he made was, I figured I would rather call someone. He said, do you have someone in your midst that if you cut them, they would just bleed Mowgli? And who's maybe, can figure out the development part. And I was in between teaching jobs, and I was sort of like, and I remember I sat down, he asked, it was like the beginning of crew week, and he asked me to go out to lunch with Jim Graff, who was then the board chair. And I was like, why the hell am I going out to, I mean, I knew Jim, but I was like, why the hell am I going out to, I'm just like, I don't even think I had the title of assistant director then. I don't even remember, but, and I remember going out to lunch with Jim Graff and going down to Biederman's and being like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. And it was later that week that, Nick and I kind of got back together and had that conversation, and that turned into, this dual role summertime assistant director slash, alumni relations and development role. And, which brought this whole new piece to the puzzle, this whole other element that I hadn't had to think about before. I'm not going to pretend it was the most fun part. It'll never top leading hikes with kids, with the boys. It'll never top any of the time I got to. I was actually just talking about a friend with this. I was trying to explain to them, Wayne, what the hell the Flying Zamboni brothers are. How do you explain that to a regular person, a Mowgli person? You sound like a crazy person.
Yes, you do.
And this person was asking me, like, what's like my personal, like, if I had to call out one specific thing that's my fondest memory, it was getting to do the Zambroni brothers. It was that first summer, 2014, when I found out that no one had done it in a number of years, that I was just like, blasphemy. Absolutely not. We're doing it right now. Luckily, there was a few counselors that had vague memories of it from when they were very young.
Yeah.
And we cobbled it together, and the kids just, I mean, when you can make a kid laugh like that, if that doesn't like make your heart a couple sizes bigger,
Yeah.
like, and then getting to pretend, one of the sort of shticks that I always sort of built into it was that it wasn't us, right? It was just, there was these guys that we had to fly them in, and
right.
I was waving in the helicopter. I never got to be there, and then I would, I have those conversations with like junior staff who are starting to sniff around to see if they could maybe get recruited, and I'd be like, well, I don't know. You have to talk to their people. I don't know, and like, when do you get to be silly like that way?
Yeah.
When do you get to be, and in some ways, maybe that's why it's really a selfish thing that I just love and miss already, that part.
Yeah.
The silliness and the goofiness that gets to come with a role.
Yeah. I tell you, as much fun as it was to get the kids, standing up and doing huddock moves and all all that, it was just wonderful to see how your grandfather reacted to it. I mean, he would be laughing uproariously. And then the next day he would make a point of coming up to me and saying, that was so much fun. I hope you'll do it again. Yeah.
Oh,
So ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, you are watching the two head Zambonis for about a 30-year period, probably.
Yep. And I was talking with Jay Galitti, who's taken on many of what were previously my roles, and it's funny, it's like watching him take on the assistant director mantle. Oh, that feels great. It's just watching a competent person do a great job.
Yeah.
Easy, right? Yeah. Watching him leading songs, doing all these, like, cool. He's really good at it. He's got all the heart in the right place. If there is one handoff that actually really, really stung, and he's actually now, I mean, he's now taken on a good chunk of my development role too. He's usurped me, right? Like he's my it was that. It was like talking about like realizing this past summer I came and did a little guest, jump in, and I was like, oh, this might be one of the last, like, and I was like, oh damn, like that was the one. It's just so funny when it's not the stuff I expected,
Yeah,
like, and I
yeah,
obviously, I've already, I'm still actually helping out with some of the development stuff and on a very, very limited basis, but just sort of in an advisory kind of capacity. And I'm helping with some stuff with the board, and I'll be at work weekend and crew weekend and all those things. I plan to be just as much of a pain in the ass to Jay and Bartolo as a variety of alumni were to me. Now I get to be that guy, which is great.
yeah,
But the thing that so far has like hurt my heart the most, no pun intended, was um, just those silly things,
yeah.
those silly things.
That's funny. I experienced the same thing. Coming back and watching you, and you did a great job with it.
Thank you.
But you can't help but say, "Gee, I miss this."
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, when I actually had thought about letting them just do it this past crew weekend, and then I was like, and Jay was like, dude, and even like for what was really interesting, Wayne, you had said, one of the highlights for you was seeing my grandfather react to it. One of my favorite parts was some of the parents who knew me as, I don't want to say a hard ass, but like definitely, one of the people that I think that their boys talked about is, having sort of a disciplinary sort of role or sort of a keeper
Hmm.
of the peace kind of thing. So I didn't always get those chances to be silly and just, be that version of myself. And for
Yeah,
some of these parents to come up to me and be like, man, it took me a minute to realize that was you, because that was just seemed so unlike your how you present when you're leading colors. Actually, that's another
sure.
one. That's another one. Wayne, I got so many like notes from parents and even campers that this summer they were like, colors wasn't quite the same, and as much as like I can't deny some pride in that to a certain extent. Like
Sure.
it's something I took seriously, and
Yeah,
it's cool to know that like, you know,
yeah,
that
yeah. Colors is one of those things that over the years, you if someone were to just tell you about it, you'd probably wonder if that wasn't a bit antiquated, but it always worked.
it does.
It always worked. And so, talk a little bit about the. I mean, you've had incredible success in your roles at Mowgli, and the all of the work that you've done in terms of development. Um, what do you talk about? Maybe the struggles at first, and then, well, when you began to feel like you were getting your stride.
Sure, sure. So initially it was just like not really knowing much about development,
Hmm.
and but then I learned really quickly that, development is really just two things, right? It's a person's affinity for a place or a cause, right?
Hmm.
And then their ability to give. It's really just that, right? And I can't control their ability, but I can have a hand in their affinity, right? I can find ways to connect with people and try to pull together those common threads of what makes Mowgli special for people. And you know this probably better than anybody else, but it's a little bit different for everybody, and
Yeah.
which things really, draw them back to the place, and when I realized that it was really just, and then yes, of course, layering structure on that, making sure that
Hmm.
like the publications look really good and that the our communications are consistent and thoughtful and in line with like they feel Mowgli, you know. Like I used to joke with Tomo Nishino, who is still on the board and was our board president for a number of years, and who is one of the folks who I would say is directly responsible for the fact that the Call is now such a robust and professional looking publication. And I always would joke, you know, we can't make it look too good though, because if it looks too good, it's not going to look very Mowgli, right? There's got to be some peeling paint. There's got to be a couple, you know, things, or it's not going to feel quite like what it should. And that part, I'm not going to lie, that part came relatively naturally. One of the challenges, of course, and this goes two directions, is my last name. And on one hand, you know, I, as of yet, have not met a single person who's had a bad thing to say about, you know, my grandfather. But, you know, between, you know, my dad and my Uncle Phil, you know, there's some other opinions, you know, floating around here and there, right? And I sort of ended up becoming the de facto representative for all of them. And while there are certain things about me that are like my grandfather, there are also certain parts of me that are very much like my Uncle Phil and very much like my dad, and even maybe a little bit of Uncle Bill creeping in there too.
Yep, yep.
And
All good things.
all good things, all good things. You know, I remember like one of a parent who I will not name, who was a camper under my grandfather and my Uncle Phil. His son was at Mowgli, and his son had gotten into some trouble about something. And I was the one sort of dealing with it. And his son had like written a letter home about sort of our interaction and whatever. And he said, as I was reading the letter, I had to remind myself that it was not Phil. Mm-hmm. That was the one that was, you know, instilling a little bit of the fear of God in a well-placed moment of necessity. Mm-hmm. So there was that, you know, there was sort of the legacies of those folks, and trying to, like, if I can put it plainly, Wayne, like, my grandfather was so admired, but I didn't just want to be his grandson.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to carve my own path and my own legacy and my own persona, and those are some damn big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
And that was something that I was probably even more conscious of than I should have been, sort of from the get-go. I think I let that get in the way a little bit. And then the last part, Wayne, is that, you know, from some of these more challenging times that Mowgli faced, particularly around sort of, you know, it feels weird to say the turn of the century, but I guess that's
right.
That's the right way to say it. There was some rebuilding of confidence that needed to be done, right? There was some reestablishing of ties. There was some relationships that needed mending, and I spent a lot of time, Wayne, having conversations with folks where I just let them say their piece.
Yeah.
You know, and I can tell you, had we not done that, the endowment campaign wouldn't have ended up where it did. No way, because some of those folks that we did some real mending with are some of the folks that helped us get it over the finish line.
Right, right.
So that was, you know, but other than that, you know, gosh, I can't say it enough. I don't know if she actually listens to these or not, but if I can't, but I will absolutely sing Holly Taylor's praises. Because I could not have done a damn thing that I did without her. She was, you know, she's just always behind the scenes of all of it, you know, in these ways that I think so many folks don't realize. But like when years later, I got asked to speak at a couple camp conferences, like about fundraising and stuff at camps. And what I would say to folks was like, you need to know who your Holly is. Who's that person who's behind the scenes, who holds all the pieces together.
Yep.
And you need to be nice to your Holly.
Because she makes you look good.
Yes, all the time.
Yeah.
All the
time. I asked her, probably 6 or 8 months ago, I asked her if she'd do a podcast, and she said, no, my job is in the background.
Yeah, well, and she's so resistant of the spotlight. But I'll tell you, Wayne, even like at the board meetings, I would always say to the board, like, the next time you see Holly Taylor, you need to give her a hug or a handshake or both.
Yeah.
because, she's just, just a home, like, and she and I mean, we still talk all the time.
Yeah.
She's become one of my closest friends and confidants, and I got to work with a bunch of my friends, Wayne.
Hmm.
Tommy Greenwell, he and I realized the other day, he's my oldest friend. He and I have known each other for over 30 years. I am 38 years old.
Wow.
He was one of my groomsmen at my wedding. And Nick Robbins, we got him internet ministered up, and he officiated my wedding. And Jay Galitti, who's our current assistant director, played the song that me and my wife walked down the aisle to.
Wow.
That's what this place is for me. It's um gosh, gosh.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing stuff. Well, you have carved out your place, and now you're carving your way into a new life. Um,
Yeah.
First,
Yep.
before we go on to
Sure.
that, though, let's kind of summarize where you see where the endowment campaign has come to, and where you see things moving ahead under different leadership.
Sure. So, short version is the functional part of the endowment campaign is done. We have received just over $4 million in pledges, the majority of which has been received. Um,
Amazing.
when we started, obviously I don't have the numbers in front of me. But when we started, I believe the endowment was at like $1.2 million, and it's well over four at this point. And by the time all of those funds are added in, we should be knocking on right around that six million-ish dollar mark for the endowment, which was our ultimate goal.
Unbelievable, James.
It did take us longer than we planned, thanks to things like COVID and everything else.
Hmm. Hmm.
But and we also received our first $1 million gift, Wayne. I mean, what better testament to the confidence of, Nick and his team's leadership and the board and Mowgli as an institution than someone willing to say, I will give you $1 million. That was a weird check to deposit, I will tell you. Tommy Greenwell deposited that. And I said, have you ever held one of those in your hand? Um, but no, and then so from here on out, I think one of the benefits of this, and the whole reason that we did the endowment campaign was to bring more financial stability to the camp,
Mhm.
so that we can turn inward a little bit and really focus on, instead of having to worry about just like constantly like fundraising butts and seats, right? Really being able to focus on the quality of the program, the quality of our staff, and getting that recipe exactly right in ways that we haven't always had the bandwidth to do, because
Right.
we were, you know, being more reactive than proactive, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely.
Um, so I think, I can tell you, having worked extensively with Bartolo and Jay, that their goal, in addition to some really exciting stuff that I'm not going to let out of the bag quite yet, I'm going to leave that to them to do. But suffice to say, I mean, we had a really cool model out at Crew Weekend this year that includes some really cool upgrades to the waterfront that we'll talk more about in the future. But no, I see now that the pressure is off a little bit. I think it's going to be just a lot more just communicating with the Mowgli community, trying to bring back some of those folks that have been on the periphery of the Mowgli pack for a long time,
Hmm.
and making sure that they all understand that they have a place, right? And doing the same with our campers, being able to provide more scholarships, being able to make sure that we are, welcoming a genuinely diverse, and varied group of young men to Mowgli every summer.
Yeah, yeah.
And it feels really good to be able to do more of that.
Right.
I
Yeah,
can tell you, when my dad was the maintenance guy, I was on a scholarship.
yeah,
There was
sure. Yeah,
That's one that was.
I was always a scholarship kid. My mom came as the nurse for the first
Yep.
few years, but when she left, I got a scholarship every year. Uh, uh,
It's important. It's an important component, and it's not something we've talked a lot about, at least not publicly.
yep.
And I'm really proud of Nick and our team and our board for making that more of a priority. This past year we did our first ever like scholarship fundraising appeal for money specifically to help offset. I mean, I don't know if people know this, but I mean, we award north of $150,000 a year in financial aid. And that doesn't even include the separately funded scholarships that we do.
Uh-huh.
And these are
Yeah.
kids that come, full ride scholarships that are like sponsored by different organizations and stuff like that
Hmm.
we partner
Hmm.
with.
Hmm.
And that's just
Yeah.
Mowgli would look a lot different without that, and it would be different in a way that's worse for Mowgli.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that you've done, I mean, you've done so much, James, but one of the things that you've done that's uh, in the spirit of your family uh, is to really diversify the kids that much. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was your grandfather brought Junior Bender to
Mm-hmm.
Mowgli back, in the early '60s. Um, and he was our first African American kid, and everybody loved him. And but now Mowgli, you go down into the camp and you see the kids, and you see such diversity among
Yes.
the kids,
Yep.
and
Oh,
it is
it's
just wonderful.
and it's become really a lot more organic too, where the vast majority of kids that attend Mowgli come as referrals, um, and like friends of family, right? Like
Yeah,
it's a guy telling his neighbor about camp, right? And one of the things that we found is that like as we've gotten more, Indian families and Asian American families, right, that like they're just telling their friends, many of whom look like them, right? And I'm not going to pretend the job is not done, right? We have not mastered it. It is not over, right? But we are doing it, I would say, not only the right way, but having gotten to see how some other camps are doing it, we're also doing it a lot better than a lot of our peers.
yeah,
Um, and I don't even mean like Anaway and Paswani necessarily, but just a lot of similarly oriented camps. Still, they have like one kid who identifies as a person of color, and they just like make sure he's in all the photos, right? And that's not
uh-huh,
the same thing. You know what I
right,
mean? Whereas actually Art Bradbury sent me this thing a few years ago. um, we had sent out the call and we had a picture of the boys on the graduates from graduates dinner, all in their, their suits and whatever. And it just happened to be like probably one of our most diverse graduates, dens. And he sent me a picture of that, and then a picture of his den. And he was like, it looks a lot different. And I love it. And that's the stuff that it's so cool to hear,
yep,
and from a guy like Art who's watched this place evolve for 70 years,
that's right, that's
you
right.
know, and does not dole out compliments readily, if I do say so myself. Uh,
And
so
mostly you can't quote him anyway.
well, I wouldn't dare, but I count compliments from Art Bradbury as double points, double points. But
Uh,
I think that's a good sense of sort of the direction things are going,
yeah.
and
So now
yeah.
what's the direction that James Hart is going?
So I appreciate you asking that. So about 2 years ago now, ish, as the endowment campaign was wrapping up, I was starting to get the itch. I was starting to get the itch just to do. I was starting to see the limitations of what I could do at Mowgli, and I was, and I have relatively early on started exploring, development in sort of the nonprofit space more broadly. Um, I don't want to say immediately, but damn near. Um, And I was doing initially I started doing some like pro bono consulting, just with some like local organizations, more out of trying to learn than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
As my sort of track record grew, that actually turned into teaching. So something I didn't even know, that up until like last year, the board didn't know that like I teach graduate courses in fundraising, and nonprofit management, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then was even doing some not pro bono consulting in
Yep.
addition to that, and I really like the nonprofit sector as a whole, and Mowgli opened that door for me. But then being able to see what the limits were of that, and also like, and I'm just going to say it out loud, Wayne, like, I'm really proud of what I've done at Mowgli, and I hope that I am remembered in a way that does honor to like what I put into it. But Mowgli's not about one person, right? It's about a pack. And one of the most important things that you can do, I believe, in any kind of leadership role is know when to get the hell out of the way. And as I got to know, like Jay Galiti in particular, like I've only more recently gotten to know Bartolo, but like I've known Jay for a really long time. I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this young dude, and I'm just like, I need to get the hell out of his way and let him do this thing. I watched him do so much of it, and it was like a recognition. It was the two of those at the same time. It was like some hunger for something a little bigger, a little further reach, and then just getting to see that there's these awesome folks like ready to step right in, and having to like just take my ego and kind of throw it out the window and go, all right. So I started looking for, and I was very open about this with the board. I basically gave them like 2 years notice. That I was going to, once the campaign was wrapped up, I was going to start actively sort of looking for another opportunity. And I found Food Rescue US this past fall. And um, I'll admit, it felt kind of outside of my wheelhouse for sure. So Food Rescue US is based out of Stamford, Connecticut, but it's a national nonprofit that does what are called food rescues. So effectively, they work with um, food producers. Think, grocery stores, bakeries, restaurants, even growers directly sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Food, uh, like food markets, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Um, and when you have that food, that's let's say you got 160 pounds of chicken. It's 3 days before the sell by date, right? Still good, especially if you freeze it, right? Then it's good. It could be good for months and months more.
Right.
About, if I have my numbers correct, about 40% of all the food that's produced in the United States ends up in a landfill. Or no, yes, yeah, 40%. And then we have literally tens of millions of Americans that don't have enough food to eat. Well, that seems stupid. So Food Rescue US created sort of an interesting way to help address this issue, which is they created an app that allows food producers, again, like grocery stores, that kind of stuff, to identify that food before it goes bad, um, list it on our app. And then what we do is volunteers claim that food to pick it up and deliver it to local social service agencies. So we cut out the middleman and get that food directly from these food producers right into soup kitchens, food banks, and we're not picky about where it goes. It can be a relatively informal church basement food pantry, right? It doesn't, we do food pantries that exist in middle schools and elementary schools, and
Mm-hmm.
everything in between. Um, and Last year, Food Rescue US kept over 38 million pounds of food out of landfills, um, and fed people with that food, which I'll also add, is usually really good food. It's protein, it's produce, it's the stuff that frequently isn't in a lot of food banks and stuff. It's not just canned
Mm-hmm.
goods, that kind
Mm-hmm.
of stuff. Um, and the way that, like, the innovative approach of the mission really appealed to me. Like, that just struck me as like, I didn't even know that was an option, and that interests me.
Mm.
um and the fact that I hadn't heard of them yet told me all I needed to know about how much potential existed. And that was what I was looking for. I needed an organization with a mission that I could really sink my teeth into and that had real room to grow. I didn't want to just like take over an organization that was already kind of, where I was just maintaining a status quo. I wanted
Yeah.
some work.
Yeah.
I want some
Yeah.
work to do. I can tell you now, I've got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But
it's a
I can tell already that it feeds your soul too.
it's different. I now have a team, a fundraising team. I have
Yeah.
grant writers and marketing folks and all that, and that's kind of new. Mowgli was sort of a one-person show in many regards. I was like designing the flyers, and Holly would help me with the mailing list, and then I'd get it to the printer, and I'd be like, Wayne, when I tell you how much time I spent over the last 7-8 years just sticking envelopes or sticking stamps on envelopes in my office at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so less of that, more of the bigger picture sort of strategy stuff, and also a lot more interfacing with corporate partners. So finding private entities that are interested in supporting our work, and so it's a different game for sure, for sure.
Yep. Yep.
But so far, I am quite smitten, and I've got a cool team. I'm wearing a different logo on my shirt these days, but it feels like forward momentum, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, if I had known that this, I would have. I still have my Harry Chapin "Every Day is World Hunger Day" uh, shirt.
Oh, I
That
love that.
yeah, that was Harry Chapin's big thing, world hunger, and you know, we lost him way too young, but uh, kids at Mowgli always, or adults now, always say, "I remember you playing cats in the cradle for us at night." Yeah, yeah,
It's important to I definitely thought about ditching the nonprofit sector, and I'm sure I could find some space. I will say though, the one thing that I do that I'm already kind of I'm missing a bit. What? And I don't need to turn this interview into a therapy session, but um, Mowgli was a lot more than a job for
hmm
me,
hmm
and the way it has been a lot more than just a camp, just a job, just right for I think generations of people.
right, right,
And I had to do a little bit of realigning in my brain about what this role would look like, and not expect it to be all of those things necessarily. Still a mission that's important to me and all those things, but not necessarily all those things.
yeah.
The thing that I missed though, and the thing that it was funny, I remember Nick kind of was sort of poking me about this as I was on the way out. He kept saying something along the lines of, I'm sort of surprised that you're not looking for something working with kids. And I will admit, I do feel a little bit of a space there that needs to get filled because I do
hmm
miss that already. Um, and food rescue will probably not be the last place I work for. But
Yeah, but unless I miss my guess, you'll figure out a way to include kids more in food rescue too. So,
oh,
um,
potentially, yeah, yeah, and maybe even finding some other. I've actually been doing a little bit of volunteer work with the Boy Scouts in my area. Um,
mhm.
their boys come to the range that I go to do their merit badge.
Yeah.
And this guy had sent out an email. He said, anyone on our membership know anything about teaching kids how to shoot 22s? And I was like, a little bit, a little bit. And that's been fun. That's been fun to
Little
get
bit.
kind of get into that a little bit. But that's all to say though, I'm gonna be around a lot. I'm still have a sort of semi-formal role, kind of helping Jay and Bartolo kind of get their feet underneath them, and actually the boards asked me to help them a little bit with some board education stuff, kind of helping the board, think about how they can sort of be the best board possible. Um, and then just hopefully showing up and being kind of a pain in the ass at the work weekends and all that stuff and getting the just be there too. So
Well, James Hart, you have already carved quite a trail for yourself, and we are so grateful for all that you've done. And I consider you to be a very dear friend, and I am so glad to have been able to work with you over the years. And so admire all the work that you have done, and I look forward to um, other adventures together.
indeed, and the feeling is very mutual, Wayne. And I can't say thank you enough to you. I used to say thank you to you for doing these interviews and stuff, because it was a great it was a great alumni engagement tool. And I have to say now that I got to I have a much keener appreciation these days for some of the history that you've managed to document. And the one I always come back to is Frank Punderson, and
Yeah, yeah.
the fact that that he passed so shortly after your interview.
Mm-hmm.
Getting some of those stories, they're just such an important part of the history. And if you didn't take this on, I'm not sure who would have. And so please just know, I'm like, what you do is truly a service to the Mowgli of today and the Mowgli of tomorrow. And
Well,
I
and this has been, I think, among the most heartfelt podcast interviews I've done, and that says a lot.
thank you, thank you. Well, it won't surprise you at all, but this whole process of my role at Mowgli changing and evolving has certainly been an emotional enterprise in no uncertain terms.
Well, good hunting, my brother.
Good hunting, Wayne. Thank you so much.